Ready anytime you are.
Okay. What was it like growing up on Brockton in the 40s?
Actually, it was a lot like Cape Cod. It was quiet at that time.
Oh.
At that time everything was quiet. It was nice. Good place to raise kids at that time.
What extracurricular activities were you involved in during your childhood?
Let's see. I played football. I played baseball. I didn't play hockey. Track. So it was a lot of basically those three. Mostly baseball.
What influenced you to enlist in the Army?
Truthfully, I wanted to go in and get it over with. Because I figured if I waited too long, I wouldn't be able to try and get what I wanted to get. Usually at that time, if you enlisted, you could get into the position that you'd like to get into and whatever you wanted to do. In other words, like I went into heavy equipment. So at that time, it was good for me. So.
All right. Explain what you needed to do to prepare to join the war.
Well, basically, yeah, at that time, a lot of people were going in and you wanted to do something that you could for yourself and for everybody else. And that's why I enlisted. And once I went in, then you had to go through basic training. I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And then my AIT was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Then I went to Germany. I went to Germany for about 7 months, and then I went to Vietnam. And believe it or not, a lot of people, once you're in there, a lot of the people that are training you have already been there. Mm-hmm. So, they give you an idea of what is coming up at that point once you get over there. But you really don't know until you get there.
And can you just classify what an AIT is?
AIT is actually basically where you go and you learn what you actually enlisted for. In other words, I enlisted for heavy equipment, and Fort Leonard Wood was basically heavy equipment, anything up to a 40-ton crane. So once I finished that, it's basically training just on that. That's all you do all the time. So it worked out for me in a way because that's where I got started in. So.
How did your family feel when you told them that you're going to serve?
Well, let's see. My mother was heartbroken. My father, he was happy because basically I'm the only son. And, once I got in, they were all fine with it. The one they had the hardest time was my wife. Because she didn't want me to go. She didn't know what was going to happen, neither did I, but you do what you have to do.
Before you enlist, what were your thoughts on war?
Well, at that time, I thought, everything you saw on the TV, they showed, people being hurt and everything else, and I basically wanted to do something to help them. So, and that's what I did. Split the question.
What was boot camp like?
Boot camp? At that time, it was tough. It wasn't like it is now. Nowadays, they can only go so far with the person when they're training. But back then, they put you, can't say it on camera, but they really put you through torture. You'd get woken up in the middle of the night. You'd have to go out into the swamps or whatever was in the area. So, you never knew what was going to happen. You just had to be on your toes all the time.
How did it feel when your troop was called onto its first mission?
Scary. Real scary because you didn't know what you were getting into. Mm-hmm. Once you get over there, well, the first thing is when you got there, you walked off the plane, you had a clean uniform at that time, but by the time you hit the end of the steps, you were just covered with sweat because it was so hot and muggy. So, you know, and then you see all these other guys that are walking by you looking at you saying, oh, good luck to you. You know, and it makes you wonder what you're really stepping into. But like I say, until you get out there, you really didn't know. So.
What was it like living in Vietnam during the war?
Well, let's see. When I first got there, it was in Cameron Bay, and actually the first night that I was there, that came under attack. So all you hear is horns going off, and then you hear the explosions. You just run for cover, and that's basically just about what it was most of the places. You'd wait. During the daytime, it wasn't too bad. It's mainly at night when they would actually come out, but during the daytime is when they'd move everything around. So, you know, you'd be on your toes for that too.
So if you were attacked, where would you move for shelter? Like,
bunkers.
Bunkers, okay.
But the bunkers were made out of sandbags, but most of the ones, which is strange, and believe me, it really is, the first time I can still remember starting to run towards the bunker, and you could see the bunker going like this. It was covered with roaches.
Oh.
You know, and you say to yourself, do you really want to go into there? But you don't have a choice. You're going to either go in there or you're going to be outside running all over the place. So, you know.
Why the Army?
Because the Army was the only one that could guarantee me that I would be able to go into heavy equipment. So, you know, the rest of them wouldn't. And enlisting, you also have a choice of which branch you're going to be going into. Whereas if back then, if you got drafted, when you went to Boston to get processed, in other words, they'd come along and say, your Navy, your Marines, your Army, your Air Force, you wouldn't get a choice.
And why did you want to join heavy, what is it?
Heavy equipment?
Heavy equipment, yeah.
Because I always wanted to do that. You know, you can drive anything from a quarter-ton truck and, like I say, up to a 40-ton crane. And I got lucky. I was able to get into driving a crane, so it worked out for me.
Can you describe the relationships you made in the military?
A lot of the guys that you meet, at first you're kind of skeptical of, you know, trusting them, but after about probably a week and a half, 2 weeks, you learn to trust everybody that's there because they're there to help you out and they're there to cover your back. You know, whereas basically on the outside, you're on your own. You know, if you get mixed up with the wrong crowd, you're in trouble. But in the military, you don't have a choice of who you get mixed up with. You got to make friends with the people you have. And that's what you end up doing.
How did you stay in contact with loved ones?
Letters. That's the only thing you could do. You couldn't call. And so most of the time what you were doing when you weren't out in the field or anything else, doing anything else at night, you'd sit back in your barracks and you'd write letters. You know, sometimes you'd get a letter, sometimes you wouldn't. Sometimes you'd go for a month without getting letters, depending on what you were doing at the time. You know, and then once you get back in, you sit down, you read the letters, and you respond to them. That's all you could do. So.
What specifically did you do as part of the Army?
I was at first when I was in Vietnam. I turned around. I was at Long Bin Ammo Depot. I loaded all the convoys with all the bombs, ammo, everything. And I stayed there for 7 months, 8 months. And once I left there, then I got connected with the 1st Cav, and I was a tunnel rat. Actually, I was the first one to go down into a tunnel, to clear a tunnel, to make sure nobody was in there or anything else. So At that time, it got scarier because you didn't know what you were getting into. You'd go down in with basically nothing but a bayonet and a 45.
Did you ever come across anything going through one of the tunnels?
Oh yeah, yeah. And then a lot of times you go down in through them, and you'd have snakes down in there. They'd have booby traps. I followed one tunnel for about 3/4 of a mile, and at the end was a hospital underground. There was like maybe 10 beds in there.
Wow.
You're looking at me like saying, wow. No, they used to they build places down underneath the ground where they could actually go in, and they'd have doctors in there where they'd actually patch them up and everything else. And like at Long Bend Ammo Depot, there was actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 tunnels that I went down in, which was right underneath the ammo depot. So they could go in, they could come up at night, plant bombs, and you had to be careful even on an ammo depot because they used to put what they call a little charge underneath. It was about that big, would be put in between pallets. So you had to look before you picked the pallets up, because if you didn't, they were going to explode on you.
Well, obviously all this is pretty scary, but what motivated you to endure through this?
The will to get home. You know, and that's where the letters come in, because people write you, you know, they're telling you how they miss you and everything else. It makes you keep your mind more clearer on basically what's happening at the time, because you're thinking of them, and you really want to get out of there and get home once you're there. And that's basically what drove me, because at that time I was just gotten engaged to be married, and I was thinking more of her and getting back there, and you know. So you do what you have to do, unfortunately.
What was your scariest moment during the war?
I'm not going to get graphic on you. Walking through the woods and finding a person tied by his feet to a branch and having a canvas bag over his head. And once you cut the canvas bag off, it's got rats in it. That was actually the scariest thing for me, until I found out I knew him. So, that's about it.
That's amazing.
Well, what was your happiest moment throughout the war?
Getting off the plane at home. Not at the war. Even coming back to the U.S., you know, we'd get off the plane and that. I got off the plane in Frisco, and people were spitting on me and everything else. But once I got back home here to Boston, once you hit home and you get your feet on the ground of where you live, that's when you know you can basically relax.
What were your living conditions like?
Let's see, most of the time, if you were living in a hooch, it was what they called the hooch. It was actually a barracks. It had a tin roof on it, tin sides. You had nothing but screens around it. You'd lay there at night and look up, and you'd see the cockroaches walking across the beams. You know, it was clean, but yet it wasn't. You know, it was something that you survived in. You know, you had a cot, a regular bed, which you had to take care of. You had to lock all your stuff in boxes. You put a padlock on it, because if you didn't, people would steal it on you. So,
How did your expectations going into the war compare to your experiences?
worse than what I thought. You know, you don't think it's really going to be that bad, but in order to go through some of the stuff, it was jungles. You basically had to make your way through everything and keep your head down and keep an eye open, you know, which they didn't prepare us for. basically. And they didn't prepare us for a lot of things, like if you're walking around, you see a 6-year-old kid coming up towards you and he's got a bag or something in his hand. They didn't prepare you to let you know that there may be a bomb in there. And I saw it happen a couple of times. You know, they had the kids that were blowing themselves up once they come close to the troops and everything else, you know, which, like I say, they never prepared you for. What they prepare you for is just to survive and basically be killed or kill them, one or the other.
Do you think they could have better prepared you for some like unexpected situations?
Probably yes. You know, but if I had it to do again today, I'd still do the same thing, because now I know what I'm looking for. It's like a lot of guys that go over to Iraq and everything else. They don't know what to expect. You know, but the rest of us really do.
Did you ever come face to face with the enemy during the war?
Yep. And what happened is, one time we were out in the field, and you're out there, and all of a sudden you hear a horn. As soon as you hear the horn, you know somebody's coming. They used to it was strange. They used to blow horns before they actually came toward you, and when they did, they come charging. You had to do something. So.
What was your opinion on the war?
My opinion on the war is, it's a war. Basically, it's not a war. It's a conflict. Mm-hmm. We didn't win it. We didn't win it because they pulled us out too soon. My thought. You know, other guys are saying, well, thankfully they got us out of there. But my thought is, it's one we didn't win. Everybody lost. And mainly the guys that came back, because they just told us we were baby killers and everything else. You know, how can you win a war with people doing that? You can't.
If you could have, would you stayed in Vietnam longer?
If I had to, yes.
When you were in the tunnels,
Yep.
did you ever come across like a maybe enemy soldier that was like left behind?
I actually, one of the tunnels that I went into, they weren't left behind. They didn't leave too many behind. They always took them with them. But I could tell that they had just left because the candles were still going. When you see a candle still going, you say to yourself, they weren't too far in front of you. You know, I was hoping I'd never meet one, and which I never did until, you know, when they attack you and that, then that's the only time you see them. They would come up with, they'd have a herd of oxen, which we were told that we could not kill, because that was the national animal. And they would actually go on the opposite side of the oxen and walk across in front of you. That's how they would move. You'd have to look underneath the oxen to see if you saw some extra feet.
So they used the oxen, which they knew you couldn't kill, as like almost a shield.
Oh yeah, yep.
Did you have any strategies when going through the tunnels? Like looking for booby traps or stuff like that?
You always had to feel ahead. And you had to go slow, because you couldn't see really. And you'd feel with your hands very lightly, because you could feel wire if they had a boot most of the time. There's other times that they used to just have bungees in there, which is bamboo all sharpened up. And if it stuck you, you were either going to bleed to death, or they coated, some of them they coated with urine, which was basically a poison once it got into your system. So you really had to be careful. That's why you can't go into tight places nowadays.
So How, like, when you mentioned going through the tunnels, were the tunnels big enough where you could stand, or did you have to crawl through them?
Some of them were, well, the entrances were only big enough that you could actually just crawl yourself into it first, but then it would start to widen out on some of them. Some of them were maybe 3 feet in diameter, so you'd be crawling most of the time.
You have any regrets?
Nope. Nope, I have none.
Anything you change what you did?
No, like I say, if I had to do it again, I'd do the same thing.
If the U.S. didn't pull out of the war, do you believe that you guys could have won?
Eventually, yeah. Yeah. Because what it was is, when you stop and think about it, when it really started back in the 60s, excuse me, they didn't know what to expect either. But by the time I got over there, they actually started to know what they were doing. Fighting in the jungle, the tunnels, the whole everything. And I think if they'd stayed there, it would have been a lot different.
Did you ever have the need to fire a gun?
Oh yeah. On a number of times.
So when you mentioned being the first to go down in the tunnels, was your whole unit the first to go down, or were you individually the first?
I was the smallest one in the unit, so I get stuck going first.
What was that
Well,
like?
what would happen is they would come with a dog, and the dog would actually sniff around the entrance of the tunnel. He would sniff, and then after he got through clearing the entrance, then I would go in. So, and then everybody else would stay out until I called. And usually you had a small walkie-talkie on you, and if you got to a certain point, like I say, I found a hospital, then you could radio out that it's all clear up to that point. You know, other than that, if you had the fire underneath there, they'd know that somebody's in there on you. So,
Did you ever set up any booby traps?
no.
So when you were crawling through the tunnels, were you clearing out tunnels that the troops above would have already advanced past, or are you advancing
Some of them,
before?
yeah. Some of them, you'd walk right along it. It'd be like 4 to 5 feet down. And, you know, once you start following, you say to yourself, how did they ever dig these? But they did. They dug them with small shovels. You know, but people would be walking right by them and everything else. Sometimes, some of them, you wouldn't even be able to see the entrance to them.
How's coping with life after the war?
Still tough. There's times that I'll actually sit down in some places and you still get flashbacks. Also, I have a touch of Agent Orange, so that I know that's still there. You know, it's tough. Even when you see some of the guys who've been in the military, that have been in Vietnam. There's some of them that, I know of one guy that he won't even talk about it, and he was a sniper. So, you know, sometimes it is tough.
What was the hardest part about coming back to civilian life?
People spitting on you, calling you names, which happened a lot if you had a uniform on. That had happened all the time. So most of the time, once you got back, you didn't wear a uniform.
What was it like on the day you came home?
On the day I left Vietnam,
The day you arrived back here on
I-
United States.
after getting off the plane, I don't remember too much. For at least a couple of days, and then when I got back home, I slept and took a bath. And believe it or not, the water was still dirty. Because over there, you were sweating so much, everything would get into your pores. You know, but I slept for about a day and a half, which felt good because you were in a normal bed. You didn't have to worry about anything. when I did get back, I got married a week after I got back, and I was walking down the street, and the car backfired, and I hit the ground. You know, but it's just reflex. It sticks with you. There's nothing you can do about it. You're embarrassed about it.
What did you miss about home the most during the military?
The most, being around friends, family, you know, knowing what was back at home and, you know, what basically you gave up to go in there. But after a while, you got used to it. You know, it was nice to have vacations every once in a while. You could just go home and be with family and that, but unfortunately, you still had to go back.
Do you still stay in touch with your friends from the war?
Most of them I haven't. I know of a couple of them. Actually, I even met a guy that I was with over in Vietnam, about 2 months ago. Found out he was the one that actually cleared one of the tunnels for me with his dog over there, which I didn't know at that time, you know, but I stay in touch with him, yeah.
Throughout the whole war, what was your darkest memory?
The darkest memory. Walking down Saigon and watching a 6-year-old kid blow himself up. That's mine. Because I don't, well, you know, why they had kids get involved into it, I have no idea. But that was my darkest part.
Why did you choose to move to Cape Cod?
Get away from Brockton. No, my wife was born and raised in Boston, and she didn't like the quiet down here. Actually, at first, because we moved down here, she didn't like the quiet. Then we moved back to Brockton, and it was too noisy for her. She decided to move back here, and we've been here ever since.
Do you miss anything about the military?
Do I miss it? Well, the thing I do miss is some of the guys that I was with. You know, because you, like I say, you get to be friends with them all. You know, you do miss some of them. But like I say, if I had it to do again, I'd do it again. Other than that, that's the only reason I'd miss it.
What was your proudest achievement?
Making it home. Making it home in one piece.
If your grandson/granddaughter said he or she was thinking of joining the military, what advice would you give them?
Nowadays, do exactly what they tell you and keep your head down. Especially if you had to go overseas. You know, and always watch your back, always have somebody watching your back. That'd be the main thing.
Would you give them any tips from your experiences of what they didn't teach you?
Probably. You know, but the thing is, you'd have to sit down. You sit down and talk with them. You got to find out exactly what they learn, what they don't. You know, what they've taught them. So, but I'd let them know what I expected and what actually happened. So it's hard no matter how you look at it.
What do you miss the most about home?
About home? Family and friends from back here. You know, kids I went to school with. Especially the family. The family's the most important thing. You know, always stay in touch with your family. They always help you through everything.
Explain the most important thing you learned throughout the war.
Make sure the people you're with, you trust them, and make sure that they're going to cover your back. And it didn't matter the race, color, creed, or whatever. Everybody watched everybody else's back.
Was there anyone who didn't watch each other's back that you came across?
There probably was, but, you know, at the time, most of the time, if something like that happens, they're the ones that would get hurt. You know, and they're the ones that would take off running more than staying and watching everybody else's back. So,
Okay, thank you very much.
no
Yes,
problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.